Most of us are fully aware of the various things that have layers. Onions, ogres, cakes, lasagna, which is basically pasta cake. The flavors in a large burp after dinner. Layers! But I bet that most of you didn't know that fear could also have layers. But it can. And what's even more surprising and meta is that layers of fear itself has layers. Which is what I'll be diving into today. The layers of fear. If you have a fear of layers, you're looking for the Psych Help channel 3 doors down. I know you've been busy lately. Everybody in the neighborhood can see that your lore lawn is covered in weeds. Relax, as I bring around my lore mower, and I'll clean everything right up for you, so you can dive into a nice big pile of fresh cut lore.
More lore!
Okay, so this upgraded edition of Layers of Fear is what I would consider a reimagining rather than just a remake. This new release contains the original 2 titles along with the Inheritance DLC for Layers of Fear 1. It also has 2 added story chapters. The first is a bonus DLC for Layers of Fear 1 called The Final Note, which details the perspective of the painter's wife, the musician. The second focuses on a new character called the Writer, and serves as interstitial narrative to tie all the games together into one connected universe. The stories for Layers of Fear 2 and Inheritance are largely unchanged, with the most adjustments being made to Layers of Fear 1. I'll go through each of the games and discuss their specific story and background information, the differences between the new and older version, and finally the various endings of each story and how to get them. Then I'll wrap up with the overarching writer story explanation. It's like a 7-layer dip of stories, but with 5 layers, so like a 5-layer dip. Enough chip puns. Let us dip in before the cream gets sour. Layers of Fear 1 and its DLC stories center around the life of a nameless character known as the Artist or Painter and his wife and daughter. The exposition of these games comes through notes and letters found throughout the house, but since none of the notes seem to have dates, it's up to us to piece the timeline together as well as we can. Through the notes, we come to learn that he was once a successful and talented painter, with gallery shows and commissions flying in. Based on the size of his house, he's doing quite well for himself financially. He soon marries, a talented musician in her own right, and they plan an exhibit together that shares both of their work, his paintings accompanied by her music. She is described as beautiful, but with a difficult personality. Nonetheless, the artist paints her as a model for his paintings, and considers her and her music as a muse to his art. They eventually also have a daughter. Everything seems to be going well for the whole family, but the painter slowly begins to slip into an obsession with his art and begins neglecting his wife and daughter, turning to alcohol to cope with his self-inflicted stresses. You know, whiskey and water instead of wife and daughter. Bad man. Then we learn of a great fire in a local department store. It seems the mother and daughter were there when it took place, and the mother was very badly burned and disfigured by the flames. The daughter made it out fine. The husband gets a phone call about the accident and tries absolutely everything he can to fix her, even going so far as to harass several surgeons, getting 16 different opinions, and all turning him down. Eventually the wife comes home but is bedridden for a while with the pain. With the burns in her hands, she can no longer play her instruments or even hold a pen to write. And with the changes to her appearance and no more music, the husband begins to feel he has lost his muse. His work begins to suffer, becoming dark or absurd, and his critics soon begin tearing him apart. He turns to drinking again to cope with his sudden decline, and his relationship with his wife and daughter begin to sour. Like the cream! I told you it was gonna happen soon! Eventually, the couple gets to the point of only communicating via notes left around the house for each other, not talking in person. The wife now has a crippling fear of fire, for obvious reasons, and demands that the house be wired for electricity so that they can stop using the fireplaces and candles. The husband arranges this. We also learn from various notes in the game that the husband has some form of mental illness where he is hallucinating about the house being infested with rats and becomes obsessed over it. We find a note from a local exterminator that they are threatening legal action if he contacts them again, as they've been through the house several times now and have found nothing. The wife tries to learn to write again and to pick up an instrument to play, but doesn't have the mobility in her fingers to regain her old talents back. She is eventually driven deep into a depression. She hates her husband's old paintings of her, specifically his favorite tribute to her, the Lady in Black, because they represent both what she no longer is and also what her husband clearly desires to have back. So she burns them all in a rage. Eventually though, the feelings don't subside and she takes her own life in the washroom of the house. We see a flashback of the painter yelling at her through the bathroom door as he bursts in to find her there. At this point, his drinking gets worse, and we see another flashback where we can assume he hurt his daughter while angry and drunk, and she's taken away by child support and placed in a child care facility. The husband makes legal attempts to get her back, but these appear to have failed for him, as we find an article detailing how he broke into the facility to try and take his daughter back, but was caught. Liam Neeson, he is not. Now home all alone, he wrestles with his inner demons as the events of the game take place. His only obsession is to finish his current painting, his magnum opus or greatest work, which will serve as a symbol to the eventual resolution of his personal conflicts. To complete this painting, he must collect 6 materials, as he calls them, which turn out to be human body parts. While this isn't overtly stated in the game, we are led to assume he took these parts from his wife's body. There was no sign or note of any funeral or burial ceremony, nor an obituary for her passing. And the only physical deformity we're aware of on the painter is a limp in his leg from an incorrectly fitted lower leg prosthetic to replace a leg he lost in the war. So where did this flap of skin, bone fragment, blood, finger, and eyeball come from? There's also the lock of hair, but it's clarified more in this version of the game that it came from his daughter. The only 2 hints we get of the wife's body still being in the house during the events of the game is a shopping list that contains an excessive amount of air fresheners that we do see later in the game on a bricked up wall in the kitchen. Perhaps she's buried back there and the air fresheners are to hide the smell of the corpse. This is also hinted at in the Inheritance DLC when the daughter walks into the kitchen and remarks, "So unless the painter has been secretly shatting in the closet, the body was probably decomposing in there." The painter finishes his painting with the final material, which triggers the ending of the game. There are 3 different ways that the game can end depending on the choices and actions you took during the game, which leads to 3 different portraits that get painted. There is the selfish, self-portrait ending, where the husband comes to the resolution that all the hell he's been through was simply necessary pain for him to come back around to his greatness, and we see his self-portrait hung up in a gallery signifying he is famous again. There is the remorse, wife and child portrait ending, where the painter comes to realize what he's done and lost for the sake of his art, and takes his portrait into his storage room full of other paintings of his wife, where he burns everything down around him and ends his own life in flames. And there's the neutral wife portrait ending, where he finishes the portrait of his wife, but it transforms and disfigures in front of his eyes, laughing at him. He sees that this painting is just another failure and throws it in the same storage room as before. He grabs his workshop keys again and returns to his workshop only to uncover a fresh canvas to start his magnum opus all over again. The way to unlock these endings isn't obviously drawn out to the player, but is based on the majority of actions you take one way or another. Picking up notes about the rats or about the painter's work, picking up painter-focused mementos like alcohol bottles, and keeping away from the ghost of the wife more often leads to the selfish ending. Likewise, picking up the wife's green journal pages, the daughter's drawings, mementos involving the wife's items, and approaching the ghost of the wife if she falls while chasing you will lead you to the wife and child ending. If you've interacted with both sides in fairly equal measure, then you'll get the loop ending. It's not clear how much you have to sway either way to get the endings, so just do your best to minimize one or the other as much as possible. This game is the most changed from the original release. Many of the notes and rooms have changed order and position. Puzzles have been removed entirely, or just simply moved rooms. There is some added lore with the wife and painter's joint exhibition, and there is also added voiceover including full VO for all the notes you can pick up, as well as observations by the writer, the painter, and the Rat Queen, explained later, that add more context to the actions taking place than the things the painter is going through. The other major change is the addition of the lantern, which can be used as both a light source temporarily, but also as a means to burn away what the game calls echoes or visions. It can also be used to temporarily burn away and stun the ghost of the wife when she's chasing you, which is also partly new. She was present in the original game and would attack you if you approached too closely, but it was much more scripted and she didn't chase you through rooms. Layers of fear. Unhappy wife, unhappy life. There is one new secret bonus ending that was added to this release. In the original release, the player never returned to the house lobby until the end of the game, always just walking through halls and coming out directly into the workshop to update the painting. In this version, however, after chapters 1, 3, 5, and 6, the players return to the lobby instead and must make their way to the workshop on their own. But while in the lobby, you can hear the faint sounds of the wife crying, and if you enter the rooms where the sounds are coming from, there is a small puzzle to solve before you should proceed to the workshop. In chapter 1, it's in the bedroom, where you need to find 4 pieces of the broken vanity mirror and restore it. All the pieces are in the bedroom, so they aren't hard to find. You'll hear an audio cue and see the mirror shatter again, indicating that you completed this part. The process is similar for chapters 3 and 5, being in the daughter's room and the washroom respectively. For the daughter, you must find 4 toy bowls and put them on the plates in front of her bears on the dresser. For the washroom, you must find 3 perfume bottles and place them on a tray on the counter. For chapter 6, you will see 4 missing paintings on the wall in the stairway, which you can find around the lobby and replace in their respective positions. If you complete all these tasks, after placing the final painting, you'll hear the voice of the wife telling you to see yourself out, at which point you can walk to the front door and leave, unlocking the letting it go achievement as you abandon everything presumably and go off on your own. Solid advice for the ages. When life gives you lemons, run away from home. That pretty much wraps up Layers of Fear. There is a brief interlude with the writer at this point, which I'll detail later, but during that scene we find 2 books on the desk nearby, which are the access points for the old Inheritance DLC, as well as the new DLC chapter on the wife's story called The Final Note. Let's start with trying to get our inheritance, shall we? The daughter, now grown up, returns to the house to try and find some form of resolution to the emotional turmoil she's been dealing with ever since she was taken from her father as a child and everything that happened. The house is in a worse state of disrepair, as the daughter makes her way around with a flashlight to see what she can find. Through a series of flashbacks and visions in several of the rooms, she recalls various scenarios involving her father and mother that the player has the choice to resolve in one way or another. An easel in the workshop that the player can either use crayons on, to the father's disapproval, or a paintbrush and various paints which the father appreciates. In the pantry under the stairs, she has a flashback of hiding and hearing her father coming and yelling, and she can lock the door or do nothing and let him get in. Upstairs in the bedroom, she can hear her mother's cries of pain and turn on the record player to soothe her or just do nothing. In the daughter's old room, a vision of her father painting a portrait of her, where she is asked to keep looking up as the game tries to pull the camera away in random directions. If the player keeps correcting the view to look at the father, he is pleased, otherwise, he's angry. And finally, a scene in the basement where the mother is teaching her how to play the piano, and she uses crayon drawings on the keys to help follow the sheet music above. If you play properly, the mother is happy. If you play wrong notes, the father yells at you to keep down the racket. There are only a few notes in this DLC, adding some flavor to the father's mental state after his wife has died, and his obsession with the rats. But the gameplay itself and story is largely unchanged. As with the base game, this DLC, while quite short, has 3 different endings you can get to. These are obviously impacted by the choices you make in the flashbacks, either choosing resentment and remembering your father in a bad light by choosing actions that show off his negativity, or choosing forgiveness and taking actions that show your father favorably so you remember him more fondly. Once all the flashbacks are done, a final door unlocks upstairs to the daughter's playroom, which triggers the ending cinematic upon entering. There are 7 rooms, 7 flashbacks, and 7 choices. You will get the ending for which you made the most choices. For the third ending, though, there is an alternate set of steps. Around the house, as you explore, you'll find 9 crayon drawings that the daughter made as a child. Some are just laying in the room in easy reach, while others require you to finish the flashbacks with the favorable resolution before they appear. They don't appear for the resentment choice. Once you choose all the favorable flashbacks and find all 9 drawings, instead of going into the playroom, return to the workshop and put the pictures up on the wall beside the easel. At this point, you'll be able to swap the picture positions around to make a large face appear, which turns into a map of the workshop with an X marks the spot. If you then head to the opposite side of this room and interact with the cabinet, you find a secret room and a hidden painting, which triggers the third ending. The resentment and forgiveness ending both take place in the playroom and involve you finding a portrait your father made of you. Depending on how you've chosen to see your father throughout the game, you'll react to the painting in 2 different ways. For the resentment ending, you see the painting as nowhere near enough closure, smashing it on the countertop while also knocking over a lit candelabra nearby. The house quickly alights around you while you're angrily smashing, and as you try to run out, the ceiling collapses in flames and the screen goes black. Anger doesn't solve anything, folks. If you chose to see your father with forgiveness, you will see this painting as an apology in the only way your father knew how to express himself. You decide it was this house that was a curse to him and your whole family, as you intentionally push the candelabra over and walk out the front door with the painting as the house burns down behind you. There is a short additional scene showing the painting on the wall of the daughter's home, as we hear her talking to her own child about the picture they drew, criticizing her choice of color, showing that she's continuing in her own father's critical, perfectionist footsteps. The hidden ending involves you finding a secret workshop with an easel that is covered in fabric. The daughter comes to the realization that there is no relief, no closure to the events of the past, claiming she has seen the world through her father's eyes for the first time and sees no redemption. Her story closes with her saying that she's heard that insanity runs in her family, and she's going to let it run, as she pulls the fabric off the easel showing the same starting portrait the father used for his magnum opus. The other book on the writer's desk leads to this new DLC chapter which gives some more clarity on the mindset of the wife, the musician, in her final days in the house. As for the differences from the previous version, well, it's new. It's all different. It has similar mechanics to the base game in that you have a flashlight, and there are echoes to burn away with it here. You are also still chased in certain areas by the same corrupted ghost of yourself that you can burn with your flashlight to stun. Not really sure why the woman who is afraid of fire would want to burn a vision of herself with fire, but, gameplay. There are significantly more notes in this DLC than there were in Inheritance. We learn about the wife's declining mental state after the fire through various notes and journal entries she's written found throughout the house. She receives notes from her friend, Beatrice Gillespie, encouraging her recovery, as well as notes from her doctor about her treatments. One of the really visually interesting set pieces is all the chains that are hanging everywhere in the mansion as she wanders through it. The house is supposed to represent the prison of her body that she feels she's stuck in. As the player wanders around the house finding various items relating to the accident and her recovery, she breaks chains away from various doorways that also seem to decrease the number of chains seen hanging in the foyer. Along with the notes and mementos, there are, as with the previous two titles, 3 choices the player must make along the journey that affects the ending of the game. This title, however, has only 2 endings, depending on the majority of the choices made. You can either lean towards isolation or acceptance. First, you encounter a dead songbird, which you can either put back in a golden cage, they're really slapping you in the face with symbolism here, or set it on the sill of an open window. Next up in the library is a desk where you remember learning how to write again. You can choose to write about your music, or write about the futility you feel. Finally, you'll come across 3 rooms with 3 pairs of echoes and a note on the wall that says, "Which part of me do I want to destroy?" You need to burn away the echo that represents the ending that you don't want, leaving you with the memory that fits your desired ending. Whichever echo you choose to keep 2 or more times will be counted as the overall outcome for this 3rd choice for the ending. The endings themselves don't change the ultimate outcome. The wife still dies in both cases, presumably. In the acceptance ending, she calmly descends the stairs and tells herself how she accepts there is no coming back from this, that she is simply always going to be less than she was and has nothing left to do but find a means to make it end. She walks out the front of the house, never to return. What did I tell you before about life, lemons, and running away from home? In the isolation ending, the musician picks up a knife from her vanity and takes it with her downstairs, angrily fighting against the current situation she's stuck in and stating that she won't accept it, that she is nothing if she can't be perfect. She enters the washroom and closes the door behind her as the camera pans away. It closes on 2 notes that show her album sales surged after her death, but that the husband wouldn't accept the proceeds, stating that they'd rather starve than profit off of her death. After another brief interlude with the writer, we start in on the actor's story. However, this time, he also has a name, James. He wakes up in the hallways of what looks like a sinking ship and walks out into a theater where the Rat Queen, I swear I'll explain her later, tells us that we almost had it, and pulls a little boy's head off. Nice lady. Turns out it was just a dream as he wakes up in a huge cabin still on the cruise ship. Again, through a series of notes, we find out that he's on this ship to work with a famous but temperamental director that is filming a movie on board. We frequently hear various voices in our head of either the director or of the Rat Queen guiding the actor to make certain choices along his journey. While exploring the ship, We begin to find notes and mementos that cause flashbacks to James and his sister Lily in the past. They've run away from home and stowed away on a ship, not the same ship we're on. They struggle to find food and evade the capture of the crew. Meanwhile, in the actor's own story, the director gives him various instructions on how he should build the character the director needs him to be for the film. You can either follow the director's instructions, or go against him and build the character your way. There are 4 such choices in the game, which I'll detail shortly. While on the ship, we are also sporadically chased by a large, formless creature that we have to repeatedly escape from. There are mannequins all around the ship that we are able to manipulate with the flashlight, which can also be used as a tool to temporarily stun the formless creature. Further along in young James and Lily's story, we discover that their mother had complications during childbirth with both of them, and ultimately passed away while giving birth to James. The father became abusive and hateful towards the children after the death of his wife, and was particularly cruel towards James. Their father ran a movie theater, and the children would sneak into the catwalks above, watching films without their father knowing. That's where they got the idea to play pirates. Lily was Captain Baines, and James was her quartermaster, Mr. Hardy. While the children are playing, Lily comes to see that James, while very impressionable of her, also has something called the flame within himself. It's not clear what this flame is, whether it's a sense of identity or even just a passion for art. It's up to interpretation. Eventually, it is implied that there was a fire at the theater, and the father was left gravely wounded and in pain. Lily's voice is then heard ushering James to leave with her, as there is nothing left for them here. It is suspected that Lily started the fire to protect her and her brother. This is when they ran away and stowed upon their ship. More life, more lemons, more running away from home. It's not a central theme, I swear. In the chapter where we explore the children's old home, it is interesting to note that the layout of the house, while a bit smaller, matches the layout of the artist's home. All the rooms are in the same positions and on the same floors. No explicit connections are made between the 2 houses, however. It's just something to notice. We get more details of the children's time on the boat. At one point, Lily tells James to stay in their hideout alone as she goes to search for more food. At this point, it is made clear that something terrible is done to Lily by an old female passenger. It is not clear what kind of assault took place, but nonetheless Lily feels a sense of betrayal by James and that she was always there to protect and save him, but he was never there for her. A couple other notes make it known that Lily ended up killing this passenger and throwing her body overboard before returning to James, ultimately finding solace and forgiveness in the flame within herself. While Lily was away, however, James began to get worried, and it seems made contact with an imaginary friend. This friend is soon revealed to be the Rat Queen, who begins working in his mind in unknown ways. Eventually, he and Lily reunite. At some point along, the ship the children are on is caught in a large storm and a fire starts on board and spreads as the ship sinks. Several passengers are killed in the incident, and while making their escape, Lily and James are separated. James is able to escape, but Lily is killed by some sort of explosion. Through the few audio logs we collect through the ship, we hear James meeting a man while he is sitting alone on a park bench. It is implied this man helped him towards his career in acting in some way. As we wander through the final moments of the ship, it becomes clear that we're not actually here to film a movie, and that the director is really a voice in James's own mind, trying to help him let go of the past and play the only role he has never really played, James. He wandered around the cruise ship like walking through his memories, and the choices the director put in front of him were ways of setting him free from the guilt he held onto and hid from in all his acting roles. He always idolized Lily growing up, and never took the chance to find his own character. There are again 3 endings to this portion of the story, and your outcome is based on the 4 choices the director gives you. If you follow his direction more times than not, you get the flame ending, and James finally embraces his own identity and sees himself in the reflection of a backstage mirror. If you ignore the director the majority of the time, James decides to continue rejecting his past and to emulate Lily instead, and sees her reflection as himself in the mirror. There is a 3rd ending where you make an equal amount of choices to listen and ignore the director, symbolizing that James remains conflicted. The formless creature mentioned earlier is this manifestation of James's undecided mind, never truly taking shape one way or another. In this ending, the Rat Queen appears to James and tells him she knows why he came. He seeks her help in finding the flame within him again, but she tells him he isn't ready, and that he should keep trying and come back to her when he is. The gameplay in this one only has a few alterations. The puzzles are slightly changed in places due to the addition yet again of a flashlight mechanic. While the original version did have mannequins everywhere around the ship, in this game, shining your flashlight on some of them allows you to animate them briefly, and they will adjust positions, sometimes to clear a path for you, other times offering you notes or key items. You can also stun the formless creature with it as well. There is also one final secret in this game, 4 mysterious items as the game calls them, and 1 hidden note. Finding all these objects allows you to unlock 4 hidden audio logs. The items are found by completing various small puzzles through the game, just off the beaten path. After gathering these 5 items, in the cabin, you need to use the telescope to look out the window for 42 seconds, when a conch shell will appear, which you can then collect. You can then use the conch shell, which is now attached to the mystery item display in the cabin, to activate 4 audio clips. Basically, the note and the audio clips explain that there is a world beyond our own, with ancient beings that like to toy with humans of great talent and skill, ultimately leaving them devastated by madness and/or death. It is pretty much confirmed that this rat queen is one of those creatures and is toying with James. Finally, we come to the writer's story. We first see her right at the start of the game. She approaches the lighthouse claiming she had everything, but then lost it here and wants to get it back. We then flash back to 10 years ago, where we find that the writer is in this lighthouse hermitage as a prize for a writing contest she entered and won. The prize being to write a novel about a famous but tragic story of a past artist, and to have the lighthouse to herself to be able to focus on it. Immediately upon arriving, she gets an aggressive phone call from the contest agency that she needs to start writing immediately and to stick to her contractual timelines. This call unsettles her, and so she calls her son to check in. She asks how his medication is working, but he tells her to just focus on her work and enjoy herself. So we can suspect that her son is ill with something. After looking around the lighthouse and finding a portrait covered up on a wall that flickers briefly to the image of the Rat Queen, she sits down and begins work on the novel, which ends up being the artist story that we then play through. Halfway through the artist story, there is an intermission with the writer. She is struggling with writer's block and how to finish the book, trying to dig into past personal experience. There are countless writing notes around the lighthouse with ideas written and scratched out. Out in the hall, one of the windows is blown open, and she goes to close it. She sees a vision of the Rat Queen outside and hears a voice saying that she has her truth. This obviously scares her, so she calls her son. As they talk, the power goes out. She heads downstairs to turn the generator back on and hears the voice again, claiming it is her muse and it's here to help her with the book she's writing. That it's already helped the painter, the musician, and the actor, and now she must choose to accept the help. After restoring the power, she enters the room with the portrait, which now shows the Rat Queen, and states that she'll accept the help. She hears a voice reply, "It is done," as the writer hears the phone ring in the hall. It is her son again, checking in after the call was cut off. But the writer states that she suddenly knows how to finish the book and wants to get back to work, going as far as to cut off her son as he says, "I love you." She returns to the typewriter and finishes the painter's story. Upon completing the painter's tale, we return to the lighthouse once again, but now it is 10 years later after finishing the book. At this point, the player has the option to play the 2 DLC chapters for the Inheritance and Final Note by reading the 2 books on the desk beside the typewriter. There is a note in the kitchen that over the last 10 years, even with the success of the books she wrote, it is implied her son was taken from her by the Rat Queen. Whether it was by the son dying, or just that she became engrossed in her work like the painter and actor did due to the Rat Queen's influence, and their connection broke down. There is a photo near the phone of her son, which seems to be some form of threat, as upon seeing it, she picks up the phone and calls the agency, demanding that they bring him back, and that she knows how to destroy their queen, how to break their pact. She'll write her own story in her own words. The agency warns her that that is futile, but she ignores them and hangs up. It is unclear exactly what connection the agency has to the Rat Queen, but they clearly know of her and are possibly extorting the writer using the safety of her son as leverage. But that's just a theory. She takes the Rat Queen's portrait off the wall, but it vanishes from her hands and begins appearing randomly around the lighthouse walls. It even replaces the one of her son that she used to have on her desk. She sits down to write another story about the actor, but it's not exactly explained why she's writing this one. My guess is she's writing it to try and prove she can write without the Rat Queen's help, to to break the hold the Rat Queen has on her somehow. Again, partway through the actor's story is another intermission with the writer. As she tries to leave the typewriter room, she suddenly appears at the top of the lighthouse tower. She tries to descend the stairs and appears back in the lower hallways. Entering the Rat Queen portrait's room, it transforms into a mannequin holding a ringing phone. Her son is calling, and says he's happy she's writing again and knows that that was always the most important part of her life, before hanging up. It's not clear if this call was real. She leaves the room and begins passing through various scenes from the artist's and the actor's stories. We hear the voices of the Rat Queen and her own son taunting her, and the voice of what sounds like the artist saying that he'll never be safe. I'm not sure if that means her son. She returns to the lighthouse and to the typewriter to finish the actor's story. Upon completion, we return to the writer one final time for a brief scene. She stands from the typewriter and takes out her lighter, then pulls the Rat Queen's portrait off the wall to set it alight. The Rat Queen appears in person now next to her, pushing her down before running out the front door of the lighthouse, locking it behind her. We hear her tell the writer that she needs to stay here longer, to focus on her writing, as the writer slowly drops to the ground in defeated tears as the game credits roll. What a twist! Having to stay in the house are the lemons life gave her. The Rat Queen seems to be the only real running thread tying all the games together in this updated version. While she did appear as just a portrait in the original Layers of Fear 1 release, she featured more prominently in the rest of the games and in the writer's story in this reimagining. Based on the mysterious items in the actor's story, we can surmise that the Rat Queen has been both an inspiration and a tormentor to all of these creative people throughout their lives, causing heartbreak, loss, death, but also career success, fame, and renown. There are a few unanswered questions, such as what the agency's involvement is with the Rat Queen. Are they some form of cult or worshippers of her? Do they use their agency to find creative talent for her to torment? Who knows? Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and your likes and comments down below. I really appreciate them. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next game, in the next video. But until then, my friends, as always, be legendary.